Space between fact and fiction. This is a session presented by Amity University. And please welcome with me on stage Kamal, Amit Chaudhuri, and Ashok Ferrey.
A very good morning to you all. And I see we have some die-hard fans of two very great authors who are on either side of me. I will just show you the books we're going to discuss today. Kamal, prize-winning author, a book called She Will Build Him a City. And on my right, somebody yesterday told me that this is like a boxing match, which it is kind of, except they're friends, is Amit Chaudhuri, Odyssey Abroad, by Amit Chaudhuri, who also has won just about every prize going in existence, almost. But two very distinguished authors, and a big round of applause, please. Okay, there are books that are easily classifiable, that are plain fact, plain fiction, plain balderdash, but there are some books that elude you as to what their meaning is, what their form is, what their genre. And we have two such very esoteric books here. And my job here is to try and elicit from these two guys what exactly these books mean and how they manage to slip into that space between fact and fiction, which is what this particular session is about. First of all, could I have a show of hands? How many of you have read either of these books? Okay, so very few. I would like to begin by asking each of the authors to read a small passage from their books. Kamal, would you do us the honor to begin with?
Hello. Is this okay? Yeah.
Yes.
When I'm told to read, I usually start from where everybody starts, page 1. And I'll just go to page 4, page 3 or 4.
Fine.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
This tonight is a summer night, hot, gathering dark, and that is a winter afternoon, cold, falling light. When you are 8 years, 9 years old, when you come running to me and you say, "Mom, may I ask you something? May I ask you something?" And I say, "Of course, baby. You may ask me anything." And you say, "Ma, when I'm very, very tired, when my legs hurt, I only need to call you. I just have to say, Ma, and you appear instantly like magic. From wherever you are, you set aside whatever you are doing, you come running to me, you lift me up, you carry me, you walk with me, you slow down, I say. But of course you don't. You say if it's sleep time, you put pillows on either side of me, you fluff them up, you switch off the light. You wait outside my room, and when you do not hear me move, it is then that you walk away. Mom, my question is, and you pause. You breathe in deep. You toe tap the floor. The universe spins underneath. You look into my eyes as if you are the mother and I am the child, and you ask, "Ma, is there someone who can do the same with you?" "What do you mean?" I ask. "Ma, is there someone you can call when you are tired? Someone who can lift you up, carry you around until you fall asleep? Is there someone like that, Ma? A man, a woman, is there?" So many question marks, their dots and their hooks float in the air They block my view of your beautiful face. And I say yes, maybe there is. Tonight is 30 years, 40 years later. So silent is this house that I can hear from upstairs the drop of your tear, the rush of your breath. Once like rain, the others like wind. They both make me shiver. And then I say yes that summer afternoon. Maybe there is a man or a woman who can lift me up, though I will be much more comfortable if it is a woman, because the sole man I will let myself be carried by is your father, and he is no longer with us. How tall should she then be, Ma, you say? You tell me, baby. You think for 10 seconds, 20, 30, your lips move, numbers small and big dance inside your head, and you say at least 12 feet tall, a giant, like in Gulliver's Travels, Ma, in the land that comes after Lilliput, in which the little girl, 9 years old, just like me, carries him like he were a doll. And to show what you mean, you raise both your arms, you stand on your toes, just over 2 feet in your socks, you stretch to 14, and you say, Ma, how do we go looking for her? Don't you worry, I say, we will meet her. How can you keep someone so tall hidden for so long? Ma, if she's there, will she love you like you love me? I don't know about that, baby, I say. Maybe she will if you want her to. Ma, will she have a mother and a father? Will she live in a very tall house with many, many tall people? Maybe, I say, but maybe she lives all by herself. Let me know when you meet her, Ma. I want to see her carry you. I want to see you fall asleep on her shoulder. Sure, I will, I say. And thus you run away, leaving a hole in the air shimmering, via which the afternoon leaks away and the night comes in, mixes, dissolves the scents you leave behind of winter cream and red wool, girl's skin and baby shampoo, 1 night old. Last night, I meet this woman, this very, very tall woman in this house right here where I stand, and I am now letting you know.
Ladies and gentlemen, Raj Kamal Jha and Amit, your turn now.
Fantastic. I'm very confused about what to read because you asked us to read for 2 to 3 minutes, which I thought was too long, basically. But I'm finding it very difficult to fit in something within that.
Never mind if it's
So
slightly
it just
shorter
wouldn't
or
make any
longer.
sense. Yeah. So I'll read something out which is going to be longer than 2 to 3 minutes.
That's fine.
Because otherwise it just won't make. So very quickly, ODC Abroad is about an uncle and a nephew and an uncle in London in 1985. It covers a single day in 1985 in July. The nephew goes to see his uncle. He meets other people, and he goes to see his uncle. And uncle is a bachelor who lives in a bedsit, which is a particular kind of apartment where you have a kitchenette and a little bedroom, but no bathroom. The bathroom is a shared bathroom. And the uncle is an idiosyncratic character, and also deeply resentful of the fact that, besides being single, he has to send money back home. I mean, he wants to do that, but he sends back money to his relatives. That's one of the many reasons for his for the various rants that he embarks into now and again. What I'm going to do is, I would love to read out an early section, but I'm going to the last chapter. Now, this single day that I mentioned, and whatever happens in it, the meeting between Anando, the young man, and his uncle, whom he calls Rangamama, is structured on the episodes of the Odyssey. And as you know, the episodes of the Odyssey, culminate with Odysseus' return along with Telemachus to Ithaca. So I'm reading out from this last chapter, actually, which is Ithaca, where they've just come back to Warren Street, where the Anando has rented a flat. And then they're going to go and eat at a curry house, at an Indian restaurant, and then come back. Returning to the room, he saw his uncle crouching over last year's books. By the way, Anando is a student of literature. On books on shelves, Anando and his mother had brought home from Habitat, books whose alienness he'd had to understand and tame, and which he was now liberated from. His uncle was examining Piers Plowman. His uncle is also quite literary, but the only literary figure he really recognizes is Tagore, if nobody else. I haven't heard of this Langland, he said. The English poets we knew of were Milton and Shelley. Shelley was the greatest romantic Kobe, wasn't he? Solemnly he intoned, let pity clip thy wings before you go. Langland is from much further back. Yes, this doesn't read like what you and I would take to be English, said his uncle, frowning and scrutinizing the page. Too intellectual, maybe a bit above my head, he said with sly self-deprecation. Langland wasn't an intellectual Rangamama, said Ananda, bristling. At least I don't think so. To tell you the truth, very little's known about him. His uncle lowered himself onto a chair by the dining table. He still hadn't taken off his pinstripe jacket. What are you reading? I hope you have a decent horror novel at hand, because his uncle subsists on horror novels. Yes, it's not bad, replied his uncle casually, placing his right leg on the left knee. Also, I'm rereading Debojan. Wonderful book. Have you heard of it? How could Ananda have not? It was a sacred text to his uncle. Every other conversation was punctuated by a reference to it. It's by Bibhuti Bhushan Banerjee. You know Bibhuti Bhushan, of course. About Bengali literature, his uncle presumed a scandalous ignorance on Ananda's part. Ananda was from a breed on a new planet, impossibly removed from the world that had formed his own parents. That old Bengal that his uncle had left behind and which was gone forever. Ananda, in fact, knew Bibhuti Bhushan, who'd written Pother Pachali, an unprepossessing man, but a great cherisher and noticer of the everyday, the mundane. He'd had no clue earlier that there was another side to him which was drawn to the transmigratory. What's the book about? Said Ananda, though he'd had pretty intricate accounts before from his uncle. His uncle was happy to take up the theme again. It's highly interesting, he said with the air of an anthropologist. For instance, he describes the astral plane. What's that exactly? It's a plane much like the one we live on, but where you experience things more intensely. Even a beautiful summer's day like today would be so much more vivid on the astral plane. I see. Ananda weighed the remark and tried to conceive how this day's beauty might increase. In what way? Things tremble on the astral plane. He vibrated one hand like a man who's been administered a jolt of electricity. It's mainly about life after death, he said, moving on rapidly, unrestrainably. The soul journeying through the stars and the cosmos. All sorts of extraordinary things happen on that journey. At a certain point, it can hear the screaming of the souls of various animals that have been slaughtered for our consumption. Ananda nodded, as if he could almost hear the dreadful din himself. Do you know, said his uncle, untying his shoelaces, that when a man dies, he often doesn't know what's happened. It's described in Debojan. A man suddenly falls dead on the street, say, or is hit by a car. The body's taken away in an ambulance. But the soul doesn't realize what's going on. So the man gets up, goes home as usual. Painfully, he rested a sneaker off. Everything's as it was. A while later, he notices his wife and children are weeping. He thinks, what's wrong? He goes to them, but they continue to mourn. They don't seem to notice him. It's at that point that an already dead person might come to him and break the news and guide him to the other world. He'd be reluctant to go, of course. He might have a daughter to marry, a debt to pay. It's hard to pull away. Both sneakers had come off. Who would this already dead person be? Asked Ananda, witnessing in his head the disconsolate progression of events. Oh, it could be anyone, but someone who knows the dead person, maybe a friend, or it might be a relation. Ananda was soothed by this. He'd never much cared for the conception of the afterlife. Even misery in Warren Street was more congenial to him than any possible idea of paradise. But the thought of being reunited with a known figure who'd keep you company after your death on your journey to the hereafter spoke to everything in him that, ever since he could recall, was groping its way through this world. Would you be scared if you saw saw someone of that kind? Of course I would, said his uncle, histrionically enlarging his eyeballs. He scratched his ankle, making a rasping sound. I don't want to see a ghost. If it was someone you knew, even if it were my mother, my dear friend, he said, absolving himself of being the type that rejoiced upon seeing a phantom, I'd be terrified. Said Anandu, who switched on the TV and was greeted by a gale of uproarious laughter. Terry and June were in bed, confabulating. I had a dream once, said his uncle, oblivious to the mirth, which had as suddenly subsided. You know that when our father died, we three younger ones, Dukhu, Yoma Kuku, and I, were reigned over by the three older siblings who had forceful personalities, Chodda, Shejda, and Didi. Our mother protected and looked over us all, but she had no real influence over us. Mejda was too dreamy. It was these three who controlled us, the committee. He pursed his lips at the memory of their authority. Then Shejda, who sang Tagore songs more beautifully than anyone else I've heard, died at the age of 30. He looked at Ananda. Ananda looked back at him, experiencing a sorrow that was distant yet curiously personal. Ananda had never seen this uncle. He remained forever youthful in these stories, forever in Sylhet in undivided British India. We were all completely shattered. Others cried. I grew very quiet. We knew he had a bad heart, but he was so versatile. He baked wonderful cakes and played the harmonium magnificently. No one taught him, don't know how he picked it up, that we never expected it to happen. Further merriment. Terry had emerged awkwardly from bed and was wearing his trousers. 2 days later, I had a dream. Shejda had just got back home with a group of English officers he was friendly with. He was sitting in the drawing room. They were talking and laughing loudly. Then Chodda called me aside and said, doesn't he know he can't do that? Why is he sitting over there? Go and tell him he's dead. Rangamama sighed. He gave me that chore to go and break the news. Chodda, the brother for whom he sent a monthly check to Shillong. You should read the book, he said semi-urgently, as if it wasn't too late. Can you read Bengali? A little, Ananda confessed. It's known everywhere. In China, they called it Debchan. He spat out the syllables. Debchan, he said again, almost making an authentic Chinese sound. Rangamama. His uncle looked up. What are you doing? He'd drawn blood. He'd rolled down one sock and while endorsing Vibhutibhushan's tail was mauling an itch. Sorry, a bit sheepish. These feet get no air.
Thank you very much. Now, one of the things about these two books is the absolutely seductive prose in each of them. They're very easy to read, but it's what lies beyond that very seductive, delicious prose that matters. In your book, Rajkamal, I noticed even in that very first passage, the narrative voice, the you, I mean, you keep switching. So in a way, you can read it and not really realize that the person who's telling the narrative is changing all the time, sometimes sort of after one paragraph or another. What effect were you trying to achieve with that? Or was it an experimental way of writing that attracted you? What was the reasoning behind that?
A very tough one to start off with. To me, the story was listening to the voices inside the head. And when most of us are lonely or we are just thinking about something, we think in jump cuts. We think while we switch narratives. So I think in this case, the whole effect was to sort of show what is going on inside this mother's head.
So it is kind of almost, you've sort of sliced the brain up and figured out the way thoughts actually work, and you've written it in that kind of way. It's quite interesting, but also very powerfully written. There are very sort of incredible, colorful, visceral, horrifying images in there, but we'll come to that later. In your case, Amit, now you explained that this was based on the fable, Odysseus and Telemachus, the various
Epic,
stages.
Homer's Odyssey.
Homer's Odyssey.
Yeah.
Is it necessary to know that, or have read that, or understand that in order to read your book?
You know, I'm told it isn't necessary. I mean, for me, I would think it's not necessary, but I would think that anybody, of course, who knows knows Homer's epic and also knows Joyce's Ulysses, which is difficult to know, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely.
But still, I mean, if they knew one or both of these texts, they'd see the ways in which I was playing with these texts. But even if you don't know them, I've been told, I mean, most of the people who read them don't know them, and at least they've been saying to me that they've enjoyed them, and they perhaps were being polite, but they've said it didn't matter, that they didn't know them. And there are some people who had read the Odyssey long time ago and didn't remember it, but it didn't inhibit them. Each chapter makes a kind of reference to, a playful reference to the Odyssey.
Yes.
So even if you don't know the Odyssey, you will have heard of it. So you'll know that there was a person called Homer and a person called Odysseus or Ulysses. And you'll know that you have also been plunged on some level into an epic, but also that you've been plunged into something quite mundane, ordinary, idiotic, and comic, and idiotic as well. Because there's a lot of idiocy in the interchange.
In the change.
So somebody's going to get some kind of frisson out of that.
Out of it. I think much of the enjoyment, or some of the enjoyment in that book, because it's hugely enjoyable, comes from this very Proustian prose. I know other people have said this before, but it struck me very forcibly, and that's what's so enjoyable. It's like nibbling on this little pastry, and then you want a little bit more and a little bit more, because it's very, very downplayed, your action. There's almost no action in the entire. There is action.
There's a lot of action.
Yes, but it's
both sort of in what's going on in a room or in a street, but also what's going on inside your body.
Yes.
Like you know, because but the character of the uncle is deeply concerned with his bowel movements. So there's a lot of action as far as he's concerned.
Yes.
Going on inside.
Going on inside. And actually that's the other common point within these two books. They're hugely funny and unexpectedly funny. I mean, bowel movements, for God's sake, in the middle of...
That's very serious stuff.
Serious stuff, definitely. Odysseus had bowel movements after all. Raj Kamal, now, interestingly, both your books have this idea of a fable. In your case, the fable or the myth or whatever is at the back. And your writing is very much to the front. It's as if the camera is focusing very close up on the characters and what the delicacy of their movements and the precision of their day-to-day existence. In your case, I noticed that your action is very, very fast, fast-paced, your book, very colorful, very strong language. But you have you have this idea of a fable in your characters. There's the balloon girl or the orphan, and they're put in capital letters. And there again, was it a very conscious decision? I mean, it makes it very surreal, your book. I mean, you have these very strange characters coming at you, different pages, different, and you, as you say, you jump cut from one to the other. There again, what was that rationale? What was the idea behind that?
You know, it is so difficult to answer that. Why did you write?
Why did you write it? Yeah.
It just happened.
It just came from inside.
It just came. But just a couple of things. I think one is it is, as we say, between fact and fiction. To me, fiction is what is inside you, and fact is what is outside you. And a lot of the things we do every day, we live with our fictions. I was just thinking about this the other day, that, what is hope? What is despair? What is aspiration? It is fiction. everything is fiction until it is shown to be a fact. I work in a newspaper. I did some mathematics the other day. I've really worked hard for this panel. And then I learned that I have spent most of my waking life as an adult in the newsroom. And what that does to you is that you see stories every waking moment. And these are very short stories,
Yes,
and you
yeah.
have to decide, is it worth sharing or is it not? And I think that has, and in the newsroom, everything is fiction until it is proved to be a fact. So in this way, you will see that in the way I've also written this story, that it is that space between fact and fiction. As for the names, I really doubt it matters the names of people we really care for or the people we do not care for. We need names only for those people we keep at a respectable distance. It doesn't matter to me what my father is called when I call him up and I have a chat with him. In the same way, all the people in the book are people you do not engage with. They are people who knock on the window of your car. It doesn't matter what she's called. She is the balloon girl.
I see your book very cinematically, actually. I don't know. Do you see it in cinema? Do you see it cinematically?
I saw, yeah.
Yeah.
I have seen the scenes inside my head. Yeah.
Yes, yes. They're very graphic, very graphic. Now, yours, on the other hand, I mean, although you're both sort of ending up at the same place, they're almost diametrically opposite in terms of what you get out of the book. In your case, Amit, you are very, as I said earlier, very closely focused on these two characters. And you say at one point that you are, whether it's you or whether it's your protagonist, is trying to escape from his mind to the street outside. Because that is where, I can't remember the exact words, but that's where he gets his nourishment from, or that is where life is. Is this how you saw this book? As a way of escape? I mean, in yourself, do you find your writing, I'm mixing up two questions here,
Yeah.
but if you could try and answer this very confused question.
I'm wondering on the question. The street outside has, yeah. I mean, yeah, the street outside has been important to me ever since I can remember, and it's part of my consciousness, or it's kind of coterminous. This consciousness of the importance of the street outside and the view of the street outside is coterminous with my consciousness of what was important to me, or what was going to be important to me as a writer. So now over here, of course, when I say, I have to say that over here everything I'm writing is on more than one level, because I'm playing around with the Odyssey, or playing around even with Joyce. And so when I'm saying he wants to escape from this consciousness, I'm also making a reference to Joyce's rather extremely interesting but laborious, reproduction of what, and completely invented and unreal reproduction of what a consciousness might be like. But as far as the street is concerned, I can say that it was in England first that I became aware of the importance of the street, because it wasn't available to me. By which I mean the climate, the weather,
Stopped you from...
enforced seclusion. Your central heating was on and your window was down, and I would go back to India, to Bombay, and one of the first things I would sort of experience was the constant kind of interaction in the room with the outside.
the outside.
And now, before that, I would say that before I realized the importance of the street and this interaction with the outside, which constantly distracts you from your own thoughts, I was in a very literary world as an apprentice writer. writing about literary subjects. It's only after I went to England that I realized that the joy I got from being distracted by the street, and decided that for me, the novel of character, of inwardness in any conventional sense, was not going to do. That whatever form it took, whether it was the 19th century novel or whether it was a different kind of novel. I was in the 70s as a teenager growing up with existentialism, where also the kind of emphasis was on the self, on the consciousness. And I realized that this is not going to do for me. What matters to me, in fact, is something outside of the self, what surrounds the self, what's visible outside you. And even since I'm also very interested in sound, in an aspect of cinema, which is very important to me, that is the soundtrack. Not the musical soundtrack, but the soundtrack as Satyajit Ray or his mentor, Jean Renoir, captures it. That is, you and I are talking, but life is also happening elsewhere, and it's an elsewhere that the camera cannot see. So we are always being impacted by what we cannot see. And I realize that forget about the self, talk about these kind of distractions and the impact on both the of both the visible and the invisible through sound constantly upon the self. This is what interests you. And then find a form in the novel which didn't seem to be made for such an exploration.
Precisely,
to somehow do that, somehow pull that off.
And I mean, both of you have produced novels of extraordinary new, inventive forms. Is this the way the Indian novel is going? I mean, you've both broken free from the exoticization and the exotic smells and the beautiful flowers and I mean, are you quite proud of this? I mean, you should be, really. Do you consciously see yourself as
I don't have a choice.
It's what you write.
Yeah, it's what I write, and I think to each his or her own way of storytelling. Whatever works for any person. So I'm not so sure if what I have done in the book is something very new or it marks something. But I very strongly believe in that you choose whatever device you need to do a justice to your story.
To what you want to.
And I just want to take sort of when you were talking about sound and silence, when I was writing this book, I was in Berlin, and I remember that I was also reading his book, Amit's book, but his non-fiction work.
Okay.
And what I heard when reading his book was just this wonderful sound of silence, and it was so calming to me that I even sent him a mail that that I've written, that while I was working this book. So I think it makes a lot of sense, this sound inside your head when you read, and this sound inside your head when you write.
Again, this very cinematic thing where two different things are going on at the same time. Amit, you said at one point in one of your in that book, the paucity of means and technology somehow sort of makes artistry flourish. In other words, the less you have, the more you do with it. And your book, I think, is a very good example of this. Did you consciously restrict your palette to this?
No, I think art is about all art. No, this is too large a generalization. But I think at the what's one of the fundamental things for art is metonymy, and in a particular kind of sense, that is, the part represents the whole. So the difference between, let us say, Indian classical dance and theatre, realist theatre, middlebrow theatre in England, is that for middlebrow theatre in England, they will build a wonderful set and bring in all the kind of effects that make them mimic reality. But the dancer uses mudras to tell a story, but also to suggest all kinds of often very cosmic occurrences. That is metonymy. You have limited means at your disposal. You decide that in some ways that facilitates expression rather than hindering it. The more you have at your disposal, often the worse the art is. Like for instance, the fact that now people have in cinema special effects to create more and more reality, or especially to make the fantastic seem more and more real, but ends up being very bad cinema, very bad art, like Harry Potter, for instance. So they can do everything they want.
Yeah.
But as cinema, it is terrible. When you go to look at Chaplin, he has very little. Charlie Chaplin. Towards the beginning, he doesn't even have sound. He certainly can't even. In those days, filmmakers can't even represent the world in color. They do so through black and white. Their means are limited. The limited means end up in a representation which is partial, and that being partial is fundamental to great art, to not being able to give a simulacrum, a full kind of reproduction.
Yeah.
The moment cinema moves from black and white to color, we know it loses something, and then the great filmmakers have to rethink how to use color in interesting ways, not just to give them the real, but do something more.
And in your case too, Raj Kamal, I mean, you use a few very strong images, the balloon girl, the guy, the murderer in the car. They're very, very strong images, but very few of them. But they're very graphic. And that, I think, one of the things I noticed about your book is the number of different genres that you go through. I mean, it's part horror, it's part thriller, it's part comedy, it's part children's book. And there again, did that come naturally? I mean, you just wrote as you wrote, or
It did.
Yeah,
I think life is part shock, part horror, part comedy, part romance, part that's what we go through every day.
Yeah.
So it came. To me, what was very, very important also was which Amit talks about, the city. A city is wonderful because you can hide in a city. But now with your cell phone, you cannot. Everyone knows where you are. A technology has made, everybody says location awareness. So they know where you are, even if you don't want to speak to somebody. So the only space that is left where nobody can go inside is what is happening inside you. And to me, that is a very sacred space. So a lot of the things that happen in the book happen in a space which is entirely hidden from everybody else.
And the other common thing between your two books is that they're both very funny books. Intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know. Unintentionally, but that's lovely. In yours, it's a lovely, gentle humor. You really get to like your two characters. In your case, it's just side-splittingly funny in places where it shouldn't be. You think, oh my God, this is horrific.
So I just hope that you found those parts funny that I find funny.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That'd be interesting to compare. Is comedy integral to this kind of mind games that you both play? Is it part of it?
Is comedy integral? I don't know. How do I answer that? I mean, comedy has always been integral, but it's not something that I've thought I should make integral. I find things funny. I'm drawn to through modernism. I'm drawn to what used to be called the little man of modernism.
Yes.
Like Leopold Bloom.
Yes.
I'm also drawn to daydreamers. I was talking the other day about Biswas, House of Mr. Biswas.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Mr. Biswas.
Yeah.
Grandiosely called from his birth, Mr.
Yeah,
Biswas.
Mr. Biswas.
Drawn to Narayan. These are all daydreamers who lead desultory lives. There's something deeply melancholy about them and comical at the same time. the way, for instance, so we are talking about a comedy which converges with melancholy.
Yes.
I think, Susan Sontag talks about Walter Benjamin, the cultural critic, and in an essay called Under the Sign of Saturn. And she refers to this comment that Benjamin made, that I was born under the sign of Saturn, the sign of impediments and delays. I never get my work done, you know. So his whole life was an abortive project. And one of the ways so that's quite tragic in one way, but comic in another.
Comic in another.
Because she anatomizes the melancholic and says the melancholic, like Benjamin could not even make himself a cup of coffee, even when he was 40. You know, so melancholics are fumblers. So there is something comical about the melancholic. You know, they don't seem to be able to find their way around the world. They come late for appointments. Because there are lots of melancholics in India, of course, by that definition. You know, but there's that convergence which I'm very interested in.
Yeah. There's also a feeling of what you call viraha. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Viraha, yeah.
Viraha.
Or biroho.
Viraha.
Yeah.
There's unrequited longing.
There's a separation from the loved one.
Yeah. And you actually give several examples of this, Dante and Beatrice, and of course in the book itself there's this Gilberta, the Portuguese maid or whoever that the uncle has this longing from afar.
Yeah.
Is that expressive of you? I mean, is that you in England in any way? Is that
yeah,
you?
me when I was 21, I was possessed by the kind of viraha, the longing that Kalidas had felt for Alaka. Yeah.
And actually, I'll come back to that. In your book, Raj Kamal, you talk about Bergson where dreams, where he says that what you dream about, or I'm sorry, the other way around, I think. You only dream about things that happened in your life, rearranged somewhat or jumbled. So in your case, interestingly, it's the other way around. I feel that you take your reality and you sort of turn it into this dreamlike world in your books. So both of your books are deeply, what's the word? As you said earlier, they're philosophical mind games. Amit, you say at one point, the past is another country, but another country's past is twice foreign, which is a beautiful sentence. Do you still feel that? I mean, you were talking about yourself then, obviously.
Not myself. I'm talking about, this is a character, not to be confused with myself.
But is there anything of you in there?
Yes.
In that?
Yeah, but there's also Telemachus.
Oh, yes.
And there's also Stephen, Daedalus.
Yes.
I'm talking about the fact that...
But remember, I haven't read that, so you have to
So I'm informing you right now. What's going on there. Anando is a ranter, like his uncle, but in a different way, and he's deeply homesick.
Yes.
And he's in London. He doesn't like the English, he doesn't like England, he doesn't like London, and he doesn't even like English literature. I mean, he loves English literature on some level, but on another level, he doesn't like the way it's being taught, he doesn't like college, he doesn't go to college. And then he says he likes modernist literature, but he doesn't like the Renaissance, he doesn't like Anglo-Saxon, he doesn't like medieval literature. And that's when he says, the past is a foreign country, but another country's past is doubly foreign, or some such aphorism. And what he's doing there in all of these things, in all of these rants, is echoing Telemachus's own unease at being in his own house in Ithaca towards the beginning of the Odyssey. So in the beginning of the Odyssey, Telemachus is at home with Penelope's mother. Odysseus has not returned. Ithaca, the house, has been taken over by the suitors. The people who want to marry. One of them wants to end up marrying Penelope, and they keep saying to Penelope, Odysseus is dead, marry one of us, and they've been there, sitting there for years. And Telemachus feels totally alienated in his own home. And what Joyce does is he echoes that with Stephen's alienation from the colonial world. He feels alienated from the British. So Anando's kind of alienation on various levels is an echo of Telemachus's and Stephen's alienation from their respective worlds.
From their worlds. One quick question on this side before we throw it over to the audience. Your book is it's very difficult to construct, I feel. There are multiple storylines, multiple voices. Was it actually, in fact, very difficult for you to construct it?
it was not very difficult for me to write it, but it was very difficult for my editors to work on it.
I bet it was.
But they really helped, because I think because there were so many storylines, and I knew while I was writing the book, and for this also I have to go back, since my job is to look at other stories and also see what works, what doesn't. I knew when I was writing this book that it needs very good editors, and I was lucky to get them. So they sort of sorted
out the difficulties.
Hopefully.
Okay, time for some questions now. If you raise your hand, if you've got a question, and we'll pass the mic to you. There's one over there.
Hi, my question is for Amit. You said the more we have at the disposal, the worse the art. So is then the classical minimalism...
This is my famous sense of humor. Anyway.
Okay. Is then the classical minimalism good for modern contemporary art?
Is what?
Classical minimalism good for modern contemporary art then?
What do you mean classical medievalism? Did I hear you right?
Minimalism.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating minimalist works. Nothing either for or against them. It depends on how they use minimal kind of means at their disposal. All I'm saying is that I resist the notion that the writer or the artist must either provide everything, or if technology becomes available, use that technology to reproduce the entirety of reality. That's not what art is. Art is innately about the beauty of representation. It becomes beautiful because reality is suggested through gestures, through limited means. So you go back right to the beginning of time, and people were confused about why artists were doing this. Like Aristotle, he notes that one of the great things about poetic writing is the use of the simile or metaphor. That you're constantly comparing one thing to another to illuminate the reader about that thing which that's being described. And Aristotle thought to himself, wondered why this was happening, and others after him have said, because primitive cultures had simple languages, they didn't have enough of a vocabulary, and this is why people had to compare one thing to the other. They just didn't have enough words to describe, and that's exactly the kind of misreading which persists till today, where you think that if it were not for a certain limitation of means, the artist's aim is to give the reader or the viewer everything. And if they can't do so, there must be some reason for that. But I think the artist is deliberately courting the unfinished. You know, he might have lots of words, lots of means at his disposal, but while making his art, will only select a very few, and will give the impression of being a hobbled person, of being sort of handicapped in some way. The artist is handicapped in a particular way which releases his great abilities.
Good. Anyone else? There's one here and there's one there.
My question is to Raj Kamal. You said you spent a lot of time in the newsroom, and hence you saw short stories, etc. But writing a book obviously is much more than that. What kind of research, and you wrote about dreams, etc. So is there a lot of research that you did, and how long did it take you? Was the experience, I mean, of course you've been asked difficult, was it very difficult? But just that whole experience, how long and how much research, how much work went into it?
I worked lots and lots. incredible amount of research. No, I mean, that is, no. I think where the labor comes, at least in my case, in this case, was in the writing itself. Basically, sort of in my head, it starts with a couple of scenes, and I knew the ending before I started the book. But I had no way to know how will I reach there, and the writing for me was that journey. So I basically knew that this has to happen in the end, and the research in the book was my research when I am writing the book is essentially reading some wonderful books. One of them, Amit's, because I think when you read great storytelling, you think you're a tea bag, and hopefully you will soak some of it in as you write. So that was the only kind of work I did other than my own writing. There was no major research as such. I had to draw a map of where the people in my book live, how far is the a street intersection, how far is the mall. So I had to draw those basic things, but not a whole lot of research.
Okay, there was a question over here. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, you start first.
No, it's okay. We'll take each of you. One of you.
Okay, again, this is about the limitations placed on the artist helping the art flourish. So now, since we are stuck with censorship from government and sensitive souls and all sorts of people, do you think that could help art grow in a different direction?
Yeah, that's a really, I mean, one is tempted to dismiss that question, but it's actually quite an interesting question. If you look at the history of censorship, like censorship in South Africa, for instance, but I mean, it's very difficult for me to answer. Or I'll only answer in connection to what I know about a specific instance, and it doesn't have to do with censorship. It's to do with repressive regimes and the effect that the liberation or the opening up of these regimes had on certain writers and what happened and artists. There are at least 2 or 3 kind of. So these questions more, address or have more to do with the ironies of creativity. There are no clear answers. That is to do with the ironies of creativity. One of the ironies is that Tarkovsky, this great filmmaker, made most of his great films in the Soviet Union. Soviet Union didn't understand his work. When he tried to get funding outside of the Soviet Union, when he went to America, or when the Soviet Union collapsed, or was beginning to collapse, it became more and more difficult for him actually to find funding to make his films. So the Soviet Union, this behemoth, this totalitarian behemoth which would have not understood anything but socialist realism and would have had no understanding and was bewildered by Tarkovsky's work, somehow inadvertently allowed it to exist. He is a great artist. Okay, so some part of the Soviet machine said, let's, okay, all right, another Tarkovsky film. Dubravka Ugresic is this wonderful Croatian writer. She lived in the Eastern Bloc in Yugoslavia. She always dreamed of the day when she would go to the free world. Yugoslavia broke apart. She became a Croatian writer in the free world and suddenly realized the free world is not interested in literature. What it calls literature, some of us will have gathered that literature doesn't have much to do with literature quite often. Have you got that? In the free world that literature often has nothing to do with literature. This is what Dubravka realized as her world, the repressive world, came to an end, and she was sent out into this kind of free world where actually there was no place for the more complicated forms of literariness which she was pursuing and inadvertently that repressive world was allowing her to do. So what I'm saying is capitalism and freedom and total freedom doesn't necessarily nurture the more complex forms of artistic expression. It doesn't follow. This doesn't answer your question directly about censorship, but it does take into account repressive regimes and that very, very paradoxically, very, very great artists have existed within them.
There's a question here.
I wanted to find out how you, as writers who put in so much of your soul into your work, and then your editor gets back to you with the edited stuff. And Raj Kamal, being you're an editor of a newspaper yourself, and Amit, both your books I've read, and the imagery and the passion, and it's brilliant. But how do you cope with, what is your relationship with your editors? And do you feel like saying, how dare you mess up with my work?
Not at all. In fact, just the opposite, because I very strongly believe, as you know, with a story, as with life, you need a third eye. You need someone to tell you, this sucks. This doesn't work. You may love it, and I love you, but I don't love your work. And you need somebody in your life, be it your work in fiction or non-fiction, or even paying the house rent, somebody telling you, this is wrong, this is not working. And that's what a good editor does, where she tells you that. And I really need it. I really need that a third eye. So I really look forward to the editor getting back. That said, I will have to add something here, that it is very, very important that the person who's working on your work of fiction, she gets it before any editing has been done. And that is very, very helpful when you meet somebody. In my case, I was very lucky to have an editor who reads the book and gets what was going on inside my head, and then we both sit and see, okay, how can we say it better? How can we remove some of the smoke and some of the fog? So I don't see myself doing anything without a second pair of eyes looking at it.
Amit, would you like to add something to that?
I was lucky with the early editors who published kind of extracts from my books. Like I was lucky to have great tutors at University College, finally at University College London, who would read my, Dan Jacobson read my essays and would point out to me that you've used a word here which I cannot understand. I mean, can you use another word here? And that kind of estranged me from my own work in the way that Raj is talking about. And then Carl Miller, the founder editor of the London Review of Books, I think he did two tiny pieces of editing. He published a chapter from my first novel, A Strange and Sublime Address, and and he did two pieces of editing. So that chapter described a post-lunch scenario. The family has had lunch, and they're talking very loudly to each other, and then the uncle goes to the toilet, and then he has a bath, so it can't be post-lunch. So maybe it's the next day, but it's all in one chapter. So he goes to the toilet with his newspaper and his cigarette and his ashtray, sits in the toilet and thinks deep thoughts, and he comes out and he has a bath and he sings. He suggested two changes. The people, I had said people were talking very loudly, etc. It was like Lear without the tragedy. He said, Lear without the tragedy is difficult to imagine. Can you take out that line? And then about the uncle in the toilet, I had said, he wasn't so much an armchair philosopher as a water closet thinker. And he said, just he was a water closet thinker is fine. You don't need to explicate. So those were the only two editorial interventions, and then he published it. But those two interventions helped me to revise the rest of the book, made me further attuned to what could fit in and what couldn't. And I would say that my first most valuable editor is myself. I hope I don't lose touch with this particular editor. And the second editor who's very valuable to me is my wife. Yeah. And then, of course, I've been very lucky with the editors I've had in publishing.
And that just about wraps it up. Ladies and gentlemen, Kamal and Amit Chaudhuri.
Thank you.